Happy to be here. I'm going to be talking a little bit about our utilization work from last year. It got some attention. I want to start off just by putting it in context. One of our big reports that comes out every 2 years is the high risk list. It has 24 of the most significant issues facing the federal government related to fraud, waste, abuse, or mismanagement. Federal property management has been on that list almost since the beginning, since 2003. It can get a drink in a bar starting this year, 21 years old. And underutilized property has always been one of the reasons why high risk, it's been on the high risk list. People think of telework and remote work, but we've been talking about underutilized property now for 21 years. It was only in 2023, though, that we actually started tracking underutilized buildings. In the past, we've always talked about fully vacant buildings. They're the ones that are easy to know. The Federal Real Property Profile is the government-wide database, and it very conveniently lists when buildings are vacant. And so we've been able to track that for 21 years. But knowing when buildings are only partially utilized, a lot trickier. Subject, next slide. So we picked 24 cabinet level agencies. These are all the big ones. Any big agency you think of, and a couple little ones were included in the study. These buildings are massive buildings. They average over 1 million square feet and 60 years of age. So they're big and they're old. Why did we pick these buildings? Mostly because the agencies had data on them. Quite frankly, agencies before the pandemic did not really track the number of people going into their buildings. Many of them didn't even have to go through like a turnstile. So this was all new, but most agencies wanted to know how many people were going into their headquarters building. So that there's data there. The other big reason was these are office buildings, and understanding how many people could be using an office building is a fairly known quantity. How many people should be using a laboratory or a clinic? It's a lot tougher accounting, and I wanted to keep it as simple as possible for our first study. Next slide. And here it is. You always say, one of my favorite quotes is, I would have written you a shorter letter if I had more time. And so I spent a year to basically create this figure. This is the figure of all the buildings and how much they're utilized. You might notice that they're broken down by quartile. In the report, you can see which agencies fit in each one of these utilization quartiles, but not which one is the lowest and not which one is the highest. And that was one of the caveats that we put in the report to get agencies to participate. People think we have a lot of power. GAO has zero power. I have to beg and plead for agencies to help me, give me data, give me access. We have, the abilities to force them to subpoena stuff, but I don't think we've used it in the 26 years I've been at GAO. So we're not going to use it here. So I had to convince agencies to share the utilization data, how many people are going into these buildings on a daily basis. The only way I could do it was with two qualifications. One, I had to collect it from everybody. No picking one. Usually we'll pick a selected number of agencies, and it had to be everybody. We had to all hold hands and jump at the same time. And the second one is no naming and blaming. No saying who's the worst and who's the best. So my tricky way of doing that was to do the quartile analysis, and it worked. And so what does this say? It says that all federal agencies are having problems utilizing their buildings right now. It wasn't surprising anyone, but I think that most people were surprised by the scale of the issue. The average is 25%, and we're topping out at under 50%. Like the most used federal headquarters building was only 46%. Next slide. The causes are many. First of all, it's been a problem forever. 21 years, but I'm sure the problem goes back more than 21 years. Second, buildings are not configured for maximum utilization. I have a couple pictures here of the HUD building. And as you can see, for the most part, a lot of the space was just hallways, and they just weren't configured to be used. A lot of them are from an era in the past where you had big libraries and areas for paper storage and secretary space, and a lot of space that just doesn't have a current use. And yes, a lot of federal workers are telecommuting right now, a lot more than they used to before the pandemic. Next slide. So we didn't formally apply the asset management framework that Amelia developed when she was at GAO, but I did look at GAO 1957 when I was planning this report and when we were coming up with our findings. And in a lot of ways, I'm going to make an argument that we did apply Amelia's framework, and they come out in the challenges that agencies are facing. The first one is the budget and resources. As you know, you have to maximize the value of your assets. And in order to do that, agencies are struggling to come up with the money. Reconfiguration, consolidation takes money to save money. And that was the number one thing that agencies said was the challenge to increasing utilizations of their buildings. The second one speaks to leadership support. There were concerns about in-office attendance policies, and we're talking about 4.5 years later. Agencies are still waiting for the other shoe to fall and everybody to be marched back into the office. And they're worried that the day after they consolidate or release space, they're going to have to find space for everybody once again. This election, we'll see what happens. I understand this reluctance, but it's at a certain point, you can't just keep waiting. You have to take an action and deal with the consequences if they come later. The third one deals with a collaborative culture, which is another one of the asset management framework issues. Agencies are reluctant to share in a number of ways. None of the agencies had a robust hoteling or hot desking or desk sharing policy. So everybody had their own dedicated space, and they really had no way of doing anything else. Second of all, agencies had individual silos within their agencies. The Department of Commerce has 14 different silos of different bureaus, each of which gets their own space that they decide how to allocate, and they are the ones that get to use. We're talking about secure space like SCIFs. We're talking about even conference rooms. Like this is NTIA's conference room. And so you had to break down those silos and create a more collaborative culture. And then another step up is sharing within the federal government. If you really want to get efficiencies of scale within real estate, you're going to have agencies sharing with agencies. You're going to hear about Crystal's report next, and this is what I really think is the future of federal property is co-working space. Agencies which have consistent missions or can work together in an administrative area. Every agency does not have to have an auditorium. They could share an auditorium. I even believe they can share SCIFs and secure spaces. And then the last one is dealing with quality of data and policies and plans. Agencies did not know how to measure utilization. The old method was very simple. How many people are assigned to the building times 150 or times 180 square feet, and that's how much space you needed. But that assumes everybody's going in every day. And everybody's not been going in every day for quite a while now. And so you need to have another way of measuring. And OMB was able to address that problem almost immediately after our report. They got to work with the Federal Real Property Council to develop a new benchmark for space. And I have it written down here. It's a pretty simple thing. It's everybody gets 150 square feet per person going into the building. And what we're shooting for is 60% utilization, at least 60%. So on any given day, 60% of the workspaces are occupied. and they have a long runway for rolling this out. A lot of agencies aren't ready. Next August, they'll be coming up with their plans for how they're going to implement it. And then a year from then, we're actually going to start measuring in 2026, measuring utilization. Do I have another slide? Yes, I do. So we have some ongoing studies that are going to further this work and look a little bit deeper. Right now, we're looking at shadow space. If you understand how GSA manages its federal footprint, agencies rent effectively from GSA, whether GSA is renting from a building owner or from the federal government, they go through GSA. And so agencies, if they no longer need it, they don't necessarily return it to the building owner, they return to GSA. And then GSA is responsible either for canceling that lease or backfilling it if they have a lot more firm term left. If federal building, it's even more so. GSA has to try to find a backfill tenant. But as buildings partially empty out, agencies return the space and GSA is struggling to find tenants. And so it's going to require them to consolidate partially occupied buildings into full buildings and then dispose of the ones they don't need anymore. We're looking at that. And the other report that we're doing starting right now is a deep dive into the Department of Transportation and all of its modal administrations. So we're going to take a look at that department, see what's the utilization of all of its buildings, all of its office buildings, what are the costs of maintaining unutilized space, and what are the consolidation opportunities that could be realized, and how much money could they save by doing that.